The Galactic Civilization database contained exactly 47,832 sentient species, each meticulously categorized according to the Universal Threat Assessment Protocol. Most fell into the comforting categories of harmless, mildly irritating, or diplomatically tedious. A precious few earned the coveted useful for trade relations designation. But tucked away in the darkest corner of the database, protected by 17 layers of encryption and a warning label that blinked ominously, lived the dreaded war species classification. War species weren't just dangerous. Oh no, that would be too simple for the galaxy's finest bureaucrats. These beings were deemed fundamentally incompatible with civilized existence. They spoke only in violence, thought exclusively in conquest, and probably ate their cereal with tactical nuclear weapons. The official protocol for encountering a war species was refreshingly straightforward: run away very fast while screaming diplomatically. The Nexus Station, a marvel of cooperative engineering that looked like someone had crossed a space cathedral with a filing cabinet, hummed with the usual bureaucratic efficiency. Representatives from 87 different species conducted the serious business of arguing about trade routes, debating the proper pronunciation of unpronounceable names, and filing reports about filing reports. It was, by all accounts, a typical day in paradise. Then the transmission arrived. Ambassador Yeth Kalan of the Crystalline Hierarchy was enjoying his morning ritual of reorganizing his tentacles when his communication array began shrieking like a banshee with a doctorate in xenolinguistics. The message that scrolled across his display made his crystalline structure literally crack with terror. Greetings, soft flesh entities. This is Battle Leader Grunty of the Iron Storm Collective. We demand immediate parley with your warrior chiefs. Failure to respond will result in extreme disappointment. The last two words were somehow more terrifying than any death threat could have been. Within minutes, every diplomatic channel in the sector was buzzing with panic. The Ethereal Council convened an emergency session so quickly that 3 of their members accidentally materialized inside each other. The Hive Cluster's queens began laying anxiety eggs at unprecedented rates. Even the notoriously calm Philosophical Brotherhood started asking deeply uncomfortable questions about the nature of existence and whether they should update their wills. Director Harvin, a practical centaurian whose species had perfected the art of looking perpetually constipated, called an immediate emergency session. His 4 eyes darted nervously between the assembled representatives as he cleared his throat with a sound like grinding gear. Fellow beings, he began, his voice carrying all the authority of wet tissue paper, we face an unprecedented crisis. The Iron Storm Collective has made contact. They are, he paused to consult his notes, as if the words might spontaneously combust, a Class 7 war species. The reaction was immediate and predictable. The Gossamer Wing delegation fainted en masse, their delicate forms drifting to the floor like disappointed butterflies. The militant pacifists began aggressively meditating, their peaceful humming taking on distinctly warlike undertone. Someone from the back shouted, "We're all going to die," which was followed by the much more practical, "Should we update the insurance policy?" Now. Director Harvin said, raising his hands in what he hoped was a calming gesture, but mostly looked like he was surrendering to invisible attackers. Let us not panic. We are civilized beings. We have protocols for this situation. The protocol is to run, squeaked Ambassador Flitter, whose species had evolved from prey animals and never quite gotten over it. The database clearly states that war species are inherently hostile, militaristic, and incapable of peaceful coexistence. Technically, interrupted Professor Zixel, the station's chief xenosociologist, the database also states that they possess advanced tactical capabilities and sophisticated combat coordination. Perhaps we should consider the possibility that they've developed beyond their initial classification. The suggestion was met with the kind of silence usually reserved for funerals and tax audits. You want us to? Director Harvin's voice cracked like an adolescent asking someone to prom. With a war species. A war species that probably considers diplomatic immunity a type of armor plating. I'm simply suggesting, Professor Zixel continued with the obstinate rationality of someone who had clearly never been in actual danger, that we cannot make assumptions based on outdated data. When was the Iron Storm Collective last observed? What if they've evolved? What if their current intentions are genuinely peaceful? The assembled delegates stared at him with the kind of expression usually reserved for watching someone juggle live grenades while riding a unicycle. Director Harvin consulted his emergency protocols handbook, a document so thick it had its own gravity well. Page after page of bureaucratic wisdom flowed past his increasingly desperate eyes. In case of war species contact, evacuate immediately. Do not attempt communication. Update last will and testament. Consider career in poetry. None of it was particularly helpful for actually dealing with the situation at hand. Perhaps, suggested Ambassador Quillith of the Diplomatic Corps, her voice carrying the kind of forced optimism typically reserved for telling children that vegetables taste good, we could simply ignore them, pretend we never received the message. They're broadcasting on 17 different frequencies, replied the communications officer, a young Stellarian whose bioluminescent patches were flickering with stress, including some we didn't even know existed, and they've positioned 3 of their vessels at our perimeter. Rather large vessels, with what appear to be, he swallowed hard, friendship missiles. Friendship missiles. Director Harvin's headache was rapidly approaching supernova status. That's what they're calling them. The scans indicate they're actually some form of gift delivery system. The room fell into the kind of contemplative silence that usually preceded either breakthrough revelations or complete mental breakdowns. It was Ambassador Yuth Kalan who finally voiced what everyone was thinking but nobody wanted to say. We need someone crazy enough, reckless enough, and diplomatically insane enough to actually try talking to these beings. The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud of inevitability. You don't mean, Director Harvin whispered. The humans, Yuth Kalan confirmed, his crystalline form dimming with resignation. We need the humans. The human diplomatic vessel arrived at Nexus Station with all the subtlety of a caffeinated rhinoceros at a teapot, where other species favored sleek, crystalline ships that whispered through space like expensive poetry. The human craft looked like someone had welded a dyna to a missile and called it a day. It docked with a series of mechanical clanks that made the station's sophisticated mooring systems sound distinctly embarrassed. Director Harvin watched through the observation deck as the human delegation disembarked, his 4 eyes tracking their movements with the fascination of a xenobiologist, observing a particularly exotic form of controlled chaos. The humans actually walked, like bipedal land mammals through the station's corridors with an alarming lack of appropriate terror. Their leader, a middle-aged female with graying hair and the kind of smile that suggested she found the universe personally amusing, stopped to examine the station's defensive systems with what appeared to be genuine interest, rather than existential dread. Fascinating, she murmured to her companion, a tall male whose posture suggested he had never encountered a threat he couldn't either befriend or ignore. Look at these plasma barriers. They're configured for maximum intimidation rather than actual effectiveness. Very theatrical. Ambassador Yuth Kalan, who was serving as reluctant tour guide, found his crystalline form flickering with confusion. Those barriers have successfully deterred 17 separate hostile incursions, he protested weakly. Oh, I'm sure they have, the human female replied with the kind of patronizing kindness usually reserved for explaining simple concepts to particularly slow children. But they're designed to keep things out, not facilitate communication. See how the energy matrix creates a psychological barrier even when it's offline. Brilliant psychology, terrible diplomacy. The male human had wandered over to examine the station's automated security protocols, which were currently running a standard threat assessment on the new arrivals. The system, designed by the galaxy's finest military minds to intimidate potential troublemakers, began its usual routine, flashing red lights, ominous warning sounds, and a computerized voice that could make reading grocery lists sound like death threat. Warning, the system intoned with mechanical malevolence. Undregited interities detected. Biological signatures indicate elevated stress hormones and unpredictable behavioral patterns. Recommend immediate containment protocol. The human male laughed, actually laughed at what the rest of the galaxy considered their most sophisticated deterrent system. Hey buddy, he said to the scanner, as if addressing an old friend. We're just here to chat. No need for the intimidation routine. The security system, which had never been addressed directly in its 300-year operational history, seemed to experience something resembling confusion. Its warning lights shifted from threatening red to uncertain amber. Clarification required, it announced with distinctly less conviction. Defy chat. You know, talking, shooting the breeze, sharing stories. Maybe grabbing some coffee if you've got any around here. The system's processors worked overtime trying to categorize this response. Coffee consumption was not listed anywhere in its threat assessment protocols. Professor Zixil, who had been observing this interaction with the kind of academic fascination usually reserved for watching civilizations collapse in real time, leaned over to Director Halv. "They're communicating with our security system," he whispered with barely contained excitement. "As if it were a person. That's not normal, is it?" Director Halvan replied, his headache evolving into something that probably required its own zip code. "Nor." Professor Zixil's laugh carried a note of hysteria. "They've just convinced our most advanced defensive system to engage in small talk. I'm not even sure normal applies to this species." The human delegation was now settled in Conference Room Gamma 7, a space specifically designed to intimidate visiting dignitaries, with its imposing architecture and subtle psychological pressure. The humans had apparently decided to redecorate by pulling the chairs into a friendly circle and producing what appeared to be snacks from their personal effect. One of them was actually brewing tea using some kind of portable heating device that probably violated 17 different safety protocols. Director Halvan entered the conference room with the air of someone approaching his own execution, flanked by Ambassador Yethkalan and a nervous contingent of diplomatic staff. The humans looked up from their impromptu tea party with expressions of genuine welcome, as if they were hosting old friends rather than meeting beings who had summoned them to deal with a potentially civilization-ending crisis. "Director Halvan, I presume." The human female extended her hand in what their cultural briefings had described as a handshake, a primitive ritual involving the voluntary grasping of appendages. "I'm Ambassador Chen, and this is my colleague Ambassador Wu. We understand you have a communication problem." "A communication problem," Director Halvan repeated slowly, as if tasting the words for hidden toxins. "Yes, I suppose that's one way to describe an imminent invasion by a Class 7 war species, or the Iron Storm Collective." Ambassador Chen's tone suggested they were discussing mildly inconvenient weather rather than galactic annihilation. "We reviewed their transmission on the way over. Interesting linguistic structure. Very direct, though I suspect there might be some translation issues." "Translation issue?" Ambassador Yethkalan's crystalline form was now cycling through colors that didn't have names in most languages. They demanded immediate parley and threatened extreme disappointment. What possible translation could make that sound peaceful? Ambassador Wu looked up from his tea preparation with the expression of someone explaining a particularly obvious concept. "Well, they said parley, which is an old human term for negotiation, and extreme disappointment could mean anything from mild irritation to feeling left out of social events. Without cultural context, we're just guessing at their actual intention." The assembled alien delegates stared at the humans with the kind of expression usually reserved for watching someone defuse bombs while blindfolded. "You want?" Director Halvan's voice had reached frequencies that were probably causing distress to nearby marine life. "Why not?" Ambassador Chen replied with a shrug that somehow managed to encapsulate humanity's entire approach to diplomacy. "Worst case scenario, we have a nice conversation before the universe ends. Best case scenario, we make some new friends. Either way, we get to find out what friendship missiles actually." The room fell silent except for the gentle bubbling of Ambassador Wu's tea preparation and the distant sound of Director Halvan's sanity quietly packing its bags.
The Iron Storm Collective's arrival could be felt 3 sectors away. Their flagship, a vessel that looked like someone had crossbred a Gothic cathedral with a particularly aggressive asteroid, materialized at the station's perimeter, with all the subtlety of a supernova having an existential crisis. The ship's hull was adorned with what appeared to be decorative spikes, though closer inspection revealed them to be some form of communication array that pulsed with an ominous crimson glow. Every alarm on Nexus Station began shrieking in perfect harmony, creating a symphony of terror that would have made composers weep with envy. Emergency protocols activated automatically, sealing blast doors and routing all non-essential personnel to the panic rooms that had been specifically designed for situations exactly like this one. The station's defensive systems powered up with the kind of mechanical enthusiasm usually reserved for expensive fireworks displays. In the observation lounge, Ambassador Chen sipped her tea and watched the approaching vessel with the detached interest of someone observing particularly fascinating weather patterns. "Impressive design," she commented to Ambassador Wu, who was making notes in what appeared to be a standard diplomatic notebook. "Very imposing." though I notice the weapon ports are configured more for show than actual combat effectiveness. Director Halvin, who had been monitoring the situation from the relative safety of his command bunker, felt his remaining sanity make a break for the exit. Show. Those are Class A plasma cannons. Each one could vaporize a small moon. Oh, absolutely, Ambassador Chen agreed with the kind of cheerful acknowledgement usually reserved for discussing garden vegetables. But look at the positioning. They're arranged for maximum visual impact rather than tactical advantage. It's almost artistic, really. Very thoughtful of them to consider the aesthetic appeal of potential annihilation. The communication array crackled to life with a sound like distant thunder having an argument with itself. When the Iron Storm Collective's voice emerged, it carried the kind of bone-deep authority that made mountains consider relocating to avoid potential confrontation. Attention, soft flesh entities of the floating metal construct. The voice boomed with all the warmth of a nuclear winter. Battle Leader Gruntak demands immediate audience with your warrior chiefs. We bring gifts of combat and offerings of glorious battle friendship. Prepare your strongest warriors for honorable engagement. The remaining alien delegates who hadn't already evacuated began making sounds that ranged from dignified whimpering to outright wailing. Ambassador Flitter had apparently fainted so hard that he'd achieved a new state of unconsciousness that medical science had yet to classify. Even the usually stalwart crystalline hierarchy representatives were making crystalline sounds that roughly translated to various forms of terminal despair. Ambassador Chen, meanwhile, had perked up like someone who'd just heard their favorite song on the radio. Oh, how lovely. They've brought gifts, and they're asking for an audience, not demanding surrender. Very polite considering the circumstances. Polite? Director Halvin's voice had reached frequencies that were probably visible to the naked eye. They just threatened us with glorious battle friendship. That's not even a real concept. Isn't it though? Ambassador Wu had pulled out what appeared to be a portable translation device, though it looked suspiciously like something he'd cobbled together from spare parts and optimism. In many human cultures, friendship and combat sports are closely related. Maybe they're just trying to invite us to play. Before anyone could process the implications of this observation, the Iron Storm vessel began launching its mysterious friendship missile. The projectiles streaked through space with trails of what appeared to be glittering confetti, each one roughly the size of a transport shuttle and decorated with patterns that hurt to look at directly. Incoming friendship bombardment, announced Battle Leader Gruntak with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for religious experiences. Prepare to receive tokens of our magnificent warrior affection. The station's defensive systems immediately began calculating trajectories and preparing countermeasures. But Ambassador Chen had somehow managed to access the communication controls and was broadcasting on the same frequency. Hello there, Battle Leader Grunt, she called out with the kind of cheerful enthusiasm usually reserved for greeting neighbors at barbecues. We're absolutely delighted to meet you. Would you like to come aboard for some tea? We've got excellent refreshments and a lovely conference room where we can chat properly. The silence that followed was so profound that it seemed to have its own gravitational field. Even the station's ambient systems seemed to hold their breath, waiting for whatever response this unprecedented breach of galactic protocol might provoke. Battle Leader Gruntak's voice carried a note of confusion that somehow made his terrifying bass rumble sound almost curious. Explain this concept of TE. Is it a form of combat beverage? Not exactly combat, Ambassador Wu replied, having somehow patched himself into the communications system as well, though it can be quite invigorating. It's a social drink. We share it with friends while we talk and get to know each other. Friends, the battle leader repeated, as if testing the word for structural integrity. This is acceptable terminology. We accept your invitation to engage in TE. Ambassador Chen and Wu exchanged glances that somehow managed to convey entire volumes of interspecies diplomatic theory in a single moment. Wonderful. Ambassador Chen replied. Would you like us to help you dock? Our station systems can guide your ship to a suitable berth. Negative, Gruntak responded. We shall demonstrate our navigational prowess through aggressive docking maneuvers. What followed was perhaps the most terrifying display of precision flying anyone had ever witnessed. The massive Iron Storm vessel approached the docking bay with movements that were simultaneously graceful and absolutely menacing. sliding into position with the kind of aggressive elegance that made ballet look violent by comparison. The ship settled into the docking clamps with a series of mechanical sounds that somehow managed to sound both threatening and oddly satisfied. Director Halvin watched through the observation windows as the airlock cycled open, revealing the silhouette of battle leader Grontak himself. The war species leader emerged like a living nightmare given physical form. 8 feet tall, covered in what appeared to be naturally occurring armor plating, with multiple arms that ended in appendages designed for either delicate manipulation or creative dismemberment. His head bore a crown of spines that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, and his eyes glowed with an inner fire that suggested either deep intelligence or barely contained homicidal mania. He was also carrying what appeared to be a potted plant. "Greetings, soft flesh warrior friends," Grontak announced, his voice somehow even more intimidating in person. "I bring offerings of friendship flora and await the commencement of social tea combat." Ambassador Chen stepped forward with a smile that could have powered small civilization. "Battle leader Grontak, welcome to Nexus Station. We're absolutely thrilled to meet you. That's a lovely plant, is it, from your homeworld?" The terrifying war species leader looked down at his potted offering with what might have been pride if pride could be expressed through the medium of barely contained violence. "Affirmative. This is combat-fern. It demonstrates superior aggressive growth patterns and tactical leaf arrangement. We cultivate such specimens as symbols of friendship dominance." "How thoughtful," Ambassador Wu added, apparently taking notes on interspecies gift-giving protocols. "We'd love to learn more about your gardening technique." Director Halvin felt his worldview restructuring itself in ways that probably violated several laws of physics. Conference Room Gamma 7 had been transformed into something that defied every known principle of diplomatic protocol. The intimidating circular table had been abandoned in favor of a more casual arrangement where battle leader Grontak sat cross-legged on the floor, a position that somehow made his 8-foot frame of living armor look oddly endearing. His combat fern occupied a place of honor on the table, its aggressive foliage casting dramatic shadows that would have been menacing if not for the cheerful teacup sitting next to it. Ambassador Chen poured tea with the practiced ease of someone who had apparently decided that serving beverages to galactic terrors was just another Tuesday. "So battle leader," she said conversationally, "tell us about your people. What brings the Iron Storm Collective to our little corner of the galaxy?" Grontak accepted his teacup with surprising delicacy, his armored appendages handling the fragile ceramic with the care of someone diffusing an explosive device. "We have journeyed many cycles through the void between stars," he began, his voice still carrying enough bass to rattle windows, but now tinged with something that might have been loneliness. "Our warrior hearts seek worthy opponents for glorious friendship combat." Director Halvin, who had been observing from what he considered a safe distance, felt compelled to interrupt. "Friendship combat? What exactly does that mean?" The battle leader's glowing eyes focused on him with an intensity that made Director Halvin's 4 eyes water in sympathy. "Combat friendship is the sacred bond forged between worthy warriors through mutual demonstration of skill and honor. We engage in ritual battle play to establish dominance, hierarchy, and social affection." Ambassador Wu looked up from his notes with the expression of someone solving a particularly satisfying puzzle. "You're talking about competitive sports, aren't you? Games with rules and winners and losers?" "Affirmative," Grontak replied, his bioluminescent spines flickering in what might have been excitement. "Your species comprehends the sacred nature of competitive friendship warfare." "Oh, absolutely," Ambassador Chen said, settling back with her tea. "Humans love competitive games. We have thousands of different sports, from gentle recreational activities to full-contact competitions. Some of our most cherished friendships are forged through athletic rivalry." The silence that followed was broken only by the gentle clink of teacups and the sound of Professor Zixel frantically rewriting everything he thought he knew about war species classification. "Then," Grontak continued, his voice now carrying a note of hope that somehow made his intimidating rumble sound almost vulnerable, "your people would be willing to engage in friendship combat. We have traveled far seeking worthy opponents who understand the sacred bonds of competitive." Ambassador Wu set down his teacup with the air of someone making a momentous decision. "Battle leader, I think there's been a significant misunderstanding. When your people approached other civilizations requesting glorious battle friendship, what exactly were you hoping to achieve?" The massive alien shifted position, his armor plates creating a sound like distant thunder. We sought to establish diplomatic relations through traditional combat sports. Our cultural protocols require demonstration of mutual respect through competitive engagement. We brought gifts, he gestured toward the potted combat-fern, and invitations to participate in ceremonial tournaments. Director Halvin felt something that might have been understanding dawn in the ruins of his shattered worldview. The friendship contained recreational equipment and ceremonial decorations for establishing proper sporting venues. Grontak confirmed with obvious pride. We researched optimal conditions. Grontak confirmed with obvious pride. We researched optimal conditions for multi-species competitive environments. Ambassador Chen began laughing, not the hysterical laughter of someone whose sanity had finally snapped, but the genuine amusement of someone who had just witnessed the universe's most elaborate misunderstanding. Oh, this is wonderful. You've been trying to invite everyone to a galactic sports festival and they've been interpreting it as a declaration of war. Affirmative. Grontak's voice carried a note of confusion that made his terrifying bass rumble sound almost plaintive. We have been disappointed by the lack of response to our invitations. Many civilizations flee before we can properly explain our peaceful competitive intention. The implications of this revelation began spreading through the assembled diplomatic staff like a particularly virulent form of enlightenment. Ambassador Yuthkalan's crystalline structure was cycling through colors that didn't exist in any known spectrum as he processed the reality that the galaxy's most feared war species were actually just really enthusiastic about organized recreational activities. Battle leader Ambassador Wu said carefully, "Would you be interested in establishing formal diplomatic relations with the galactic civilization? We could arrange proper introductions, maybe set up some exhibition matches to demonstrate your cultural tradition." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Grontak's bioluminescent spines erupted in patterns of light that could probably be seen from orbit, while he produced a sound that was part war cry and part celebration. This would bring great honor to the Iron Storm Collective. We have prepared extensive competitive programs for interspecies engagement. Director Halvin watched as the humans began sketching out preliminary diplomatic frameworks with a species that had been classified as an existential threat to galactic civilization. Within the span of a single afternoon, they had transformed a potential war into what appeared to be the foundation for the universe's most elaborate sporting league. So, Ambassador Chen said, refilling teacups with the casual efficiency of someone who had just solved a galactic crisis before dinner, "What kinds of competitive activities does your people excel at?" Grontak's enthusiasm could have powered small sun. "We have mastered 17 categories of combat sports including tactical flower arranging, aggressive poetry composition and competitive friendship build." 3 months later, Director Halvin stood in the same observation lounge watching as the Nexus station hosted its first interspecies friendship games. The Iron Storm Collective's ships filled the space around the station, no longer looking like harbingers of doom but rather like the support vessels for the galaxy's most enthusiastic, athletic delegation. Battle leader Grontak had become something of a celebrity, particularly after his victory in the inaugural diplomatic poetry slam had reduced several hardened military officers to tears of appreciation. The humans naturally had appointed themselves as official interpreters and cultural liaisons, a role that seemed to involve an alarming amount of impromptu tea parties and the kind of casual conversation that transformed galactic threats into dinner party anecdotes. Professor Zixil approached with a datapad containing the revised classification for the Iron Storm Collective. "We're updating their status from Class 7 war species to enthusiastic recreational partners," he announced with the satisfaction of someone whose academic theories had been vindicated in the most absurd way possible. Director Halvin nodded, watching as a group of human children taught Grontak's offspring the finer points of what appeared to be an extremely aggressive form of hopscotch. "And the other war species in the database? We're reassessing," Professor Zixil admitted. "It turns out that several civilizations we classified as inherently hostile were actually just culturally misunderstood. The humans have volunteered to serve as universal friendship translators for future first contact situations." In the distance, Ambassador Chen could be seen mediating what appeared to be a heated discussion between a crystalline hierarchy diplomat and an Iron Storm warrior about the proper rules for competitive meditation.
Both parties seemed to be enjoying themselves immensely. Director Halvan sipped his tea, a habit he'd picked up from the humans, and reflected on the galaxy's remarkable capacity for absurd misunderstandings. Somewhere in the vast cosmos there were probably dozens of other species whose intimidating exterior concealed nothing more threatening than an overwhelming desire to make friends through the medium of organized recreational activity. And thanks to humanity's inexplicable ability to befriend literally everyone, the galaxy was about to become a much more interesting place to live.